Hi y'all, this is Geoffrey Giuliano, and I'd like to discuss with you a very, very special book to me, and to actually many of you, because I've seen it listed on eBay for a few $100, original edition. It was my first book, The Beatles, A Celebration. Interesting story how this, and this was published around the world by Sidgwick and Jackson in England, St. Martin's Press, very high-so American publisher in America, and Matthew and Carswell in Canada. That no longer exists, but at the time, trust me, it was a big publisher. So this is a big mother. It's like the phone book. There's quite a story behind this one. I never had any intention of being anything but an actor. I took my degrees as a Shakespearean actor, but then went on to do illustrious roles like Ronald McDonald on TV commercials in America and The Marvelous Magical Burger King, I can do most anything. So, and dinner theater, and you know, I did the traditional training that I don't know that people do too much anymore, where you start out in children's theater, then you go to the high school, and then university, and then dinner theater, and you do all these. So by 1980 or 81, I had been hired. I'd beaten out like 500 or 600 people to play the part of Ronald McDonald on the TV commercials, and it was based out of Toronto at an advertising agency called Vickers and Benson. And I learned immediately what fucking horrible people these corporate fucks are, and how they want to rule and do the world, and how very unpleasant they are at McDonald's. Anyway, I had to hide the fact that I was a vegetarian, and I didn't think that would go over too well. You know, Ronald McDonald was a vegetarian. I later exploited it with a sort of project I did to save the animals when I was younger and out to save the world. Anyway, after doing that for a couple of years, Ronald McDonald, I'd had enough of these corporate monkeys, and I think to be honest, they'd had enough of me. I am, in essence, a hippie at heart, so I can't do too much of that corporate shit. So there I was, in Canada. I'm American now, remember, and I got 2 kids in school illegally, and because my work permit had run out, so they weren't really supposed to be there. We weren't supposed to be there. And no way to make any money. And the neighbors were bringing us groceries. You know, we lived in sort of a nice neighborhood because I made quite a bit of money as Ronald, and suddenly it stopped. And I kept the shoes though. Anyway, that was horrible when the neighbors were bringing groceries. I used to make my wife go to the door. I'm not fucking going to the door. You go. Thank you so much. You know. So everybody knew the state. And finally, the principal said, "Look, you don't have a right to be here, so your kids can't even go to school." I don't know what the hell to do. So I did the most unlikely, extraordinary, impossible thing that I don't think anyone has ever successfully done in the history of mankind, which is I looked under P for publishers in the yellow pages in complete desperation, living in abject poverty, can't pay the rent, can't buy food, kids can't go to school, don't have the money to move back to America, don't have the money to stay. What did I do? I looked under P for publisher, and I saw Methuen. So I called him up. I don't know nothing about writing a book. You know, I'm a fairly intelligent fellow, but that wasn't what I trained to be. And I got a lady called Tanya Long on the phone, who turned out to be my first editor. And can I help you? And yes, I know more, you know, taking a big breath of bullshit. I know more about the Beatles than anyone in the world, and I've got the greatest collection of Beatles memorabilia anywhere. how'd you like to do a book on that? Just a moment. Not the click that I'd expected. Just a moment, please. And about 5 minutes later, a voice came on. Bill Husson here. Yes, Mr. Giuliano? And I said, yes. He said, you know, it's really funny that you called, because just very recently, we've been looking for a Beatles book that we could partner with these other publishers that I mentioned previously and publish worldwide. Why don't you come over now? So I put everything in a suitcase, 2 suitcases, and I went down there and I showed it all to them, meaning everything, meaning my collection. And they said, we'll give you 30,000 Canadian dollars. This was like $1 million, you know, when you don't have any money. Still not bad for world rights. Now, for world rights, it sucks, because for London and America, I made almost $600,000 for world rights. But, okay, it was my first book. I'd never written a word. And so, yeah, I took the money. My friend said to me, like, so what are you going to do, take the money and run? And I said, well, you know, I thought about that. But then I also thought, maybe I'll try to write the book. What are you talking about, man? You don't know how to write a book. I don't know how to write a book. And I was in kind of rough shape in those days. I was doing just a little bit of coke. You can't do too much coke if you don't have money. But I was down. Let's just leave it like that. I was down in my life. And I didn't have anything like a computer until a couple of books later. So I'd write it longhand. And sometimes because I was a bit fucked up, I'd write maybe just a couple of pages a day. And it went on, you know. But the good news was that Methuen knew what they were doing. So I was able to give the images that I had, and this is an old copy, and the memorabilia that I had to a guy, a really nice guy. I remember his name was Brant Cowie. And they, you know, would do their designing, and they would sort of then wait forever for my text. And after a while, you know, they would, maybe a few weeks later, or some passage of time, they invited me down to see what they would call boards, because in those days, they take the fucking things and paste them on a piece of cardboard. It wasn't digital. It was nothing designed. It was physically like great big boards. And so I said, well, wow, a cover, and shit, I better get to work. This is actually going to happen. So I did, and I wrote, and it turned out that I could write, and well, and there was never anything like, oh, fuck, the guy's got a good idea, but he's worthless at writing. No, they did almost all my books. They did very little editing, which speaks to a kind of natural gift, I guess, as opposed to anything that one might learn. So I don't take any credit for that. But eventually the book came out, and in those days, now they wouldn't do it now, would they? Because it costs lots of money. They send you on these extravagant promotional tours, you know, limousine, stay at a big hotel, you spend $200 on your dinner. I remember the publishers took me once out, and I saw the bill, and it was $4,000 for lunch. You'd go to London, and you'd be met with the girl from the publisher who would call your wife first and say, now, what kinds of things does he like? He likes this kind of soap and this kind of muffin. And she'd hand me a basket, beautiful basket from Fortnum and Mason's with all these very incredibly expensive versions of what it is that my wife had told her that I liked. And whatever it is you want, you know, it's like being a movie star, exactly like that. And for this book, I went all over, because there was no social media, that's the point. There was no internet. So if they wanted to interview you, I actually had to go around. I did the Joan Rivers show, I did Geraldo Rivera, I did everything. And I stayed in Beverly, Wilshire, and in each city that I went to, and I might do a city a day, you know, I'd be met with a limousine. And it was, what the fuck? This is quite a big jump from the people bringing groceries to these women giving me these gift baskets filled with expensive goodies. But that reflects the fact that they were selling lots of books. Now, interestingly, this book sold for, I don't have my glasses, I can't see, so like, let's say $30. And it turns out later, because I didn't really look at the contracts, I was just so glad to have any kind of gig, that I was get like a nickel or something. So, yeah, they were happy to pay the bill on the air travel and the promotional tour. They don't do that anymore unless you're like super duper big Tom Clancy. Everybody just goes on YouTube or Skype even worse, and does their interviews or on the telephone. But this book, my first, with literally no training or even idea to be a writer, was a worldwide bestseller. And so they kept coming, and that's how 30 books happened. So although, yes, I've written so many books, people have an affection, not only me, strangely, but people have a real affection for this book, The Beatles, A Celebration. In fact, the Beatles, Apple company in London, kept it on their coffee table. And I met Paul McCartney in London, and he told me how much he loved it. And Linda, and they signed it for me. I still have that one somewhere. And so it was wonderful. However, significant in that there was a profound change of direction from this book with most of the others, in that I found that if you write, well, an agent said to me, you know, if you write wonderful things about your heroes, you'll sell this many. But if you dig a little bit more into their personal lives and get personal and more in-depth into what they may be doing in their off hours, a little bit more scandal, a little bit more titillation, you're going to sell this many. And you're going to make that much more money. Now, I will say that I certainly heard that and got that immediately, but I didn't rush right out to write shit about the Beatles so I could make lots of money. I suppose people could accuse me of that, and it was something that was presented to me. But the fact is that when you begin to move in these circles, like meeting with Paul McCartney's brother or this one or that one, and you start to know these people and meet them peripherally, as I met George Harrison and so forth and so on, and know how they live, as a journalist, which I gradually became, you learn things. Now, what am I supposed to do? Censor myself so that if I found out if there's something that might not be totally complimentary to them, I should leave it out of the book because it could maybe be hurtful to them? Or do I have a bigger responsibility to report what it is that I learn? And that's kind of the way I did the rest of the books, except the other 11 illustrated books, which you really can't do that with. So Blackbird, we know the books we're talking about, don't we, folks? Blackbird, Dark Horse, Lennon in America, Revolution. These books are deeper look, peeling back the onion skin, just, you know, and talking about their lives as human beings. And that's what sometimes upsets people. But on the other side of the coin, a lot of people appreciate the fact that I've looked and held these people up as human beings, talented people, as opposed to icons and little fairies and supermen, gods, Buddhas, when in fact they're talented. I remember an editor saying, you know, they're not, you're as talented as they are. How dare you, what an idea, preposterous, me to be. No, it could never be. But yeah, no, they were, you know, they were in the right place at the right time, and as opposed to me, who so many times in my life has been in the right place at the wrong time. But they made the most of it. They had George Martin, and they fucking talented guys, and their music holds up generation after generation, like Picasso with his art, or Andy Warhol, or Mozart, or any of the greats. So I belittle them not at all, but I don't idolize them. as I see people doing still in their 60s and 70s. They're still going on about the fucking Beatles. Dude, get a life, why don't you? But it's pleasant to listen to their music. And as George Harrison once said in closing, you know, the things that you grow up with, the things that mean something to you as you're becoming an adult, falling in love for the first time, making your way in the world, become important to you, but they shouldn't become so important to you that you're then still going on about it as an old man or old woman, which they do. Just look at Facebook. So it's not that I would like to or would ever disrespect my readership, but I would, you know, I read an interview with John Lennon, which was the Playboy interview just before he died, like days, and he said, the Beatles weren't leaders of anything. They were maybe in the crow's nest of the ship saying, you know, land ho, or look in this direction, or why don't we go over here? And if the Beatles had a message, it was learn to swim. And once you learn to swim, you swim, you know, and you catch it on your own. But the Beatles, A Celebration, I promise you, will be re-released with a cover reflective of this original design, but not exactly so, on Icon Editions, available at iconeditions.net and amazon.com. So thank you very much for your kind attention, and we'll see you next time.